where I look at it in the work that we do is really coaching, aligning the leaders to garner support inside the organization. I told you I'm speaking for a couple hundred executives in a few weeks.
They want you to teach trust.
They want to build trust in the organization. And I said, yeah, so that's your first mistake. People don't trust organizations. They trust leaders.
On this edition of The Claw, I'm joined by Jane Gentry of Jane Gentry and Company, and we're going to talk about the transformational period that we're in, not only just for companies in general, but for companies who may be in one of those situations where they're either trying to make more sales or they're making more sales than they know what to do with. Jane and her company works with leadership teams to identify what makes them unique, and we're going to talk about maybe where marketing should or shouldn't fit within that equation. So tune into The Claw as I talk with Jane Gentry. Welcome to The Claw. I'm Eric Holtzclaw, Chief Strategist at Liger Partners. The Claw is the marketing podcast for C-suite executives. And I am joined today by a very good friend of mine. She's in sort of my top five. So I love
top
hanging out
five.
with Jane.
Yay.
So
Finally.
she
Top five.
She and I are bourbon friends.
Yeah.
So we meet, whatever she orders, I order, or vice versa. And we just kind of go from there. So yeah, it's been good. What's fun about Jane and her company's Jane and Company is that her focus is very similar to what Liger's is. So Liger, unapologetically, we look for kind of complicated, companies that are in the middle of transition. They're doing M&A. They're trying to figure out who they are. But we focus very specifically in the marketing category. So we are all about how do we make marketing work for you? How do we fix what's broken and boring? Because most of the time it's both boring and broken. And we get a little bit into the technology, but mostly when we have to redo a website or whatever, but that's not our thing. And then on your side, you're dealing more in like leadership and sales and those kind of things?
We work predominantly with CEOs or C-suite executives of companies up to about 200 million who are in a messy situation. In other words, their business is stalled or it's growing too fast and they don't feel like their organization is aligned to support that growth.
Yep.
And they don't know if it's good growth, right? Or equity-backed companies we work with a lot. Owners who are trying to exit in some way. It might be an actual exit out of the business completely, or it might be they want to be less in the business and they're not sure if they have the talent in the business to support that. Yeah.
There's a friend of mine who does EOS implementation, and he talks about, most businesses can die for two reasons. They either die of starvation, meaning they don't have enough business, they sort of struggling, or they die of indigestion. And both are a problem.
Tell me more.
Well, indigestion, meaning that you've consumed so much stuff, you're growing so fast, you're trying to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
And regrettably, I rarely run into a company that isn't in one category or the other, right? It's almost like a pendulum swing between the two.
Yeah.
Right? So, and thinking like how you navigate those, and it sounds like in some of what you're doing, kind of advising that person along the way, like they just can't see what is working or not working.
In a lot of the businesses, and my background is consulting with really big companies, right?
Yeah.
But in the kinds of businesses that we work with today, these leaders, a lot of times, they don't have a person to call them into accountability. They don't have a person to kind of check in and ask questions around some of the decisions that they're making. There's not a person in the company they can be vulnerable with. So we do a lot of coaching with CEOs, but also aligning the rest of the leaders in the organization to make that growth happen, right? We do a lot of strategy work.
Yeah.
And I just, Eric, we've talked about this like 100 times because everybody's, we talk about the website thing, right?
Right.
Like every company I walk into, the CEO is like, we need a new website. And I go, nope, you need a new strategy. Then you need a new website, right? But it's that, I call it the shiny object syndrome. Um, the marketing part, that part of marketing is super fun. You get something on the back end that you can look at or hold or see on the web, and you feel like you've accomplished something.
Right.
Much of the time, they don't have the strategy to support doing a website yet.
So what are some of, I know some of the telltale tales of that?
Yeah.
Can you say that? I guess you can. I did. What are some of the signs you see when someone's like, we need a website, and you know that maybe they're not ready? What are questions they can't answer, or things that you are inquisitive about?
What's our strategy? Number one. What's our positioning? Number two.
But unpack that for me a little bit, like, because the word strategy. So what is, like, what do you think? What is a good? Does it mean I know how much revenue?
Well,
I want
we
to
talked
generate?
about somebody recently. So yeah, what is our target revenue? But also, what is our target customer? What are the
But I want to sell
problems?
to everybody.
No, you don't.
But I do.
But you don't. I'm so sorry.
But my product is amazing.
Yeah, it
and
might
it's
be,
for everyone. And this
but
is
it's not
exactly
for-
how it works.
Yeah, no. So really, it's about what problems are we solving for the customer. We're working with an equity-backed company right now that's combining 3 different companies. We don't know the answer to the question, do all 3 of those companies serve the same customer? Do they solve the same problems? Because also on the back end of that, you got to look at your sales organization and how it's structured, right? So websites are, in my opinion, they're a calling card. They're a validation. Nobody in B2B, which is where we work, is going to buy off your website. And I would argue that if they meet your salesperson, they're not going to your website first, they're going to LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So you're better off spending that front end money getting somebody to help your salespeople write great LinkedIn profiles, right? Secondly,
And share great content, like things like that.
Yes.
Stay in front of people. The website, in our opinion, is your best brochure.
that's what it is, though.
And it is the last thing I check before I decide whether or not to sign the contract.
Yes, and it needs to be about the customer.
So all that
No,
our,
it needs to be
right, yeah.
what are the other thing I say to companies is I toss out 75% of capabilities presentations. I just throw them in the trash because they start off with, here's who we are, here's where our offices are, here's what we do in our manufacturing facility. Nobody gives a crap. Can I say that?
You can, yes,
Okay.
yes.
So the way that should be really built is, here are some of the problems that our clients face. Here are some scenarios where we have solved for that. Does any of this look familiar to you? Is this resonating with you? And at the back end, I mean, if you're in there doing a capabilities presentation, you've gotten past the here's who we are, here's how many offices we have, right? You got to get fast to, who are you, my customer? What are the problems that we help you solve?
Yep.
Here's how we do that.
Yep. The capabilities deck falls similarly, and this is coaching you've given me because you fall on this category. You may not even remember giving me this coaching.
No.
But, I mean,
Did you do it?
Yeah.
Ah,
yeah.
okay.
One of the thing I'm about to share with you right now is my favorite thing you ever coached me on. So the capabilities deck, like number one, I'm going to put my best work in my capabilities deck, right? Like it's not my crap work. It's going to be my very best foot forward. So it's a representation of the very best thing I do, and yeah, you should look at it because you will get a sense for style and are they creative if that's what you're looking for or whatever, but it's their best stuff, right?
Right.
And then you and I talked about, getting to the point, because the thing that people run into often is references. So you and I had this whole conversation about clients asking for references, right?
Yep.
And it just drove me crazy because it's like, I've been on 5,000.
Because it's a stupid question.
It's a stupid question.
Right.
And what you told me to tell the people, which is what I do, I'm like, I am very glad to give you a reference. you do know I'm going to give you the very best person that I know in my network to tell you amazing things about me. They're going to love everything I've ever done. Like, I'm going to send you this reference. And if this is the last thing you need to sign the statement of work and move forward, then I'm glad to do it. But if you have any other questions after that, then we need to answer those first.
Right. And the other thing,
I love that advice.
yeah,
You should feel,
people let customers call their references way prematurely. The other thing is, I say, what is it you want to hear from a reference?
right, what have I not said?
Or what part of what we do is it that you want to validate?
Yeah.
Right. So, is it in our case, is it somebody that's exited a business? Is that the thing you want to talk about? So I don't just have 3 references that I give everybody, because that makes no sense. But it goes to my, one of my statements I say over and over and over is the one question salespeople don't ask is the next question. In other words, we stop too soon.
Yeah.
We don't continue to qualify until we really get to the core of what somebody is asking.
Or what they're concerned about. Yeah. What I found with references recently, the biggest thing that they are afraid of, which is the thing they won't ask or say until you can just push them, is they're afraid that I'm going to disappear from the account.
Oh.
So they want to talk to someone to say, hey, when you sold the deal, did you
Right.
still hear from him or did he disappear?
Yeah.
And so, that's what they're validating. But that it takes a lot to get them to admit, well, what I'm afraid of, like, I think your company and you can do this, but I'm afraid when I buy, you're gone.
Yeah, that's interesting. We don't run into that because that's what you're buying.
Yeah,
Is us. A client said the other day, what I'm buying is your powerful brain. And I said, oh my gosh, that MFA in acting has so paid off. She thinks I have a powerful brain. My dad needs to apologize to me for saying that was the dumb choice in my life. But yeah.
Yeah. And so as you talk about strategy being like, who are we going after? Did this acquisition, they acquired these 3 companies, were they just available so it felt good to pull them together, or was there a purpose and did they fit? So that's one of the things.
Or
you talk about.
there's a company, I told you this gentleman in Minnesota that wanted me to come run his company, and I said, there's not enough money, honestly, or a man hot enough to get me to go to Minnesota. But having said that, once we dug deep into the conversation, it's not really what he wanted. Number one, he's exhausted from COVID,
Right.
so he wanted to get out of some parts of his business. But also, it's that the industry he's in is changing. And I said, look, Mark, your industry is bifurcating right now. Some companies like yours are committing to this. Some companies are committing to this. Either one is okay. I have no judgment. One or the other is good or bad. But you do have to put a stake in the ground. And if you keep telling me you want to live here, you are not organized right now to live here.
Right.
So there's work to be done. You're awesome here already.
Yeah.
So when we talk about strategy, those are the kinds of conversations that we get into.
Yeah, and about making choice. I mean, that's one of the entrepreneurial mind is, no, I need to do all things for all people, and you have to start making choices.
Yeah, we need to narrow. Salespeople are the same way. And I say to them, look, I want you to make a choice. I don't want you to chase bad business because you just constantly chase whatever seems like it might be viable. If there are a lot of red lights around a particular piece of business, and you choose as an organization to go after that piece of business because it is a great brand, because you have nothing in the pipe, because it's the kind of work that you want to start focusing on, I'm okay with that, as long as it's a choice that you made and it's not a knee-jerk that I just chase everything.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurs are the same way, right?
Yeah. So choice, not desperation,
Or just oblivion.
Yeah. you go into it eyes
we
wide
just
open. Yeah.
we just go right. We have a company that we were talking to together, and they said, "Oh, well, our market is every market. Awesome, but you can't go after every market.
No.
So how are we going to decide the one or two markets you are going to start to branch out that product line out into?"
Yeah. Okay. So looking at the strategy, I think then did you say the next thing was like value? Did you say value proposition? Is that what you said? Or positioning? You said positioning.
Positioning.
Yeah. So how does that? How do you know they've got good positioning or they don't?
Because it answers the questions that the client cares about, and it's client focused. And the story is right. You know, we're meeting Dave next week about story, how to tell the story. You know, I have somebody right now, they're like, we need to get salespeople on board. They have no sales organization, which
Right.
blows my mind how they got to the size they are with no sales organization. But she goes, we got to go hire salespeople.
Yeah.
Nope. What you need to do is build the foundation so when you hire a salesperson, you can be successful. So you really haven't clearly articulated the positioning of your company, you know, using words like white glove, boutique, this and that. I mean, that's just, blech.
Boring.
It's not just boring, it's meaningless. It doesn't mean
Boring
anything.
and
It means
meaningless.
nothing to a
Yes.
customer. So how do we figure out who you are to a customer? What do you solve? What's different about you from somebody else? How do you put that into a playbook for a salesperson so that they are armed with what they need to go after business?
Yeah, and it's a tough balance because it totally makes sense. So let's say I own a restaurant. I love to use that as an analogy. So I know that if I'm hiring someone to come in and make fries, and I don't have a machine that makes fries, it's kind of a stupid hire, right? Like,
Right.
yeah, I want you to make fries. Well, you don't have a fryer. There's no potatoes here.
It's an
whatever.
expensive mistake.
It's an expensive mistake.
First off, hiring salespeople is one of the hardest hires in your organization.
Amen.
Number one. Number two, people let the wrong person in the organization hire that person. A lot of people give that to HR. HR is the last person that should be hiring for sales in your company. But you know, ramping up a salesperson and realizing later that they were a bad hire is one of the most expensive mistakes you can make in a company. And
so I agree with that.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the commercial break.
okay.
And when we come back, I'm going to ask you why the HR person shouldn't hire the sales person
Okay.
and how you prevent from making that expensive mistake. Because I have made personally that expensive mistake for the years I've been in my career so many times that,
I know, I've met them.
yes, current HR people are like,
Coached
you
them.
can't even hire another one. You're not even allowed to do it. So now I'm like, okay, well, I'll just sell everything.
know.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll be back in just a second. I'm talking with Jane Gentry with Jane Gentry and Company. You're listening to the marketing podcast for C-suite executives. We're talking today about kind of messy organizations, how you get your company either out of a stall or out of maybe overconsumption. So we'll be back in just a second.
Thanks so much for watching the Claw podcast. We'll be back after this short break.
When I first met the Unicorn Marketing Agency, everything was rainbows and, well, unicorns. They promised overnight marketing results for my business, leads my sales team couldn't keep up with. Once I signed up with them, they didn't even hold up any of their promises, even after months. And the only thing they gave me were excuses. After a while, communication with them became spotty and they were hard to get a hold of. Eventually, they stopped responding altogether. Overall, I lost a total of about $23,000 over a 4-month period. And I lost a lot of valuable time and energy.
And we're back. You're listening to The Claw, which is the marketing podcast for C-suite executives. I'm Eric Holtzclaw, Chief Strategist at Liger Partners. I am joined today by Jane Gentry. Jane Gentry and Company. She and I met when I had a radio show for a period of time, and that was the first time we met. She was a guest on my radio show. So this is kind of brings us full circle back to, in
We're a
front
lot
of the
older
microphone.
now. Hopefully we know more.
Yeah. Somebody the other day said, because I was doing some work for another company, and I walked in and they're like, there's our old whatever. I'm like, come on, like your previous whatever. How about your previous whatever?
Yeah, just own it.
Not your old whatever. I think your new guy is older than me. So how about you call me the newer, but previous version or whatever. So before we went to the commercial break, we were talking about, hiring salespeople, and because when you're going to scale your organization, so let's say we understand our strategy, let's say, and we've got a good, proposition in place. We understand what our customers care about. I ask like a journalist when I talk with a company, I'm like, you've bored me. Like, tell me what your headline is. Like, why would I read the story? Why do I care? Right. And so we got that in place. And so now it's like, we want to scale sales, right? And so you made some very strong statements.
Was that controversial?
I loved it.
Was it controversial?
So that the HR department shouldn't hire the salespeople.
No.
So I want to unpack that. And then you said something else that I don't remember, but was like, because I think it actually hurt. And so, because it was like about mistakes around HR, but sales or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the wrong salesperson. And
so you said, why shouldn't
start
HR?
there. Yeah.
Same reason procurement shouldn't buy creative.
Okay.
I
agree with that. What is this non-tangible thing I'm
yeah,
receiving?
Yeah.
How many of them am I going to get? When do they show up at the loading dock? It's like they don't.
Well, I'll tell you, first off, they leverage in general, HR leverages the wrong kinds of tools to assess salespeople. So there are a lot of assessments out in the world that people use for hiring. When it comes to sales assessments, which I think are great and valuable, most assessments that I've ever seen are for something else and modified for sales. DISC is an example of that, okay? We use a tool called Objective Management Groups, Sales Assessment, Sales Manager Assessment, that was built only for sales. And the tool looks at what are the competencies for an effective hunter, right? Tangible competencies, how are they at building relationships? How are they at creating rapport quickly? Those kinds of things. Intangible, do they have a giant book of business? Have they been in your industry for a long time? And things like, one of my favorite scores is the responsibility score. Do I take responsibility for my success or failure? And so I leverage that in a sales interview to say, hey, Eric, when you lose, I'm sure you're amazing, right? But when you lose a sale, surely it happens sometimes. Why do you usually lose?
Do you think the responsibility score is more important than like the rapport and the other pieces?
No, I think they're all, it depends how they're rated, right, on the tool. How do the ratings compare to each other? But I like to check that one in particular because it doesn't matter to me if you're great at the other stuff if you don't take responsibility. So when a salesperson says to me, price, I'll say, would you like to rethink that answer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I'm looking for something like...
It's never price.
Jane, it's never price.
It's never price.
I'm looking for something like Jane, when I lose, it's because I talk too much. And I don't listen enough. That kind of self-awareness, right? The other thing we look for is coachability. So number one, I think HR a lot of times uses the wrong tools to assess. And number two, they don't know how to run the right kind of an interview for salespeople.
So then if not HR,
sales
should do the interviews.
Yes.
Do you think, like, I mean, that's the thing, like sales, you know this, you and I have known each other for a long time, and I build really amazing organizations. I really do. Sales is my Achilles heel. It has always been my Achilles heel. I'm still the number one hunter or closer. And I don't think I fall in it. Like, I don't even know how I'm even successful at it, to be perfectly honest, because I don't really like people. Like
I've noticed.
I'm an introvert. If I could just hang out and just I love the work. I love the work, right? Like if you just would put me and let me do the work, like let me work
and
with
that
the clients
comes across though,
all that kind of stuff.
Right. But see, here's one of the things people don't understand. Sales is not about convincing you to get something that you don't want or need. Sales is about helping. And you help, right? So a great salesperson looks at their job like a helper. How do I help somebody to solve problems? It's very other focused. And I'm sure you've had the same experience. If I look back on my own career, in the times of my career where I was most focused on Jane making a lot of money, I was the least successful in my career. In the times of my career was I most focused on making sure that my customers got a promotion or making sure that they were successful. Those are the most profitable parts of my career.
Yeah, the pivot I had to make is truly at my heart of heart. I'm an educator and a journalist.
Yeah.
Those are my two favorite, like I love a room full of people and to impart knowledge and to talk about things. And I love to find out the real story. Like, why the heck did you do that? Right? Like, what is the thing behind it? And so the pivot, that's still not one that I necessarily think that I've ever made well, is there's a point at which you educate and you're the journalist, and then you're like, okay, now you got to pay me, right? Because the educator just wants to educate for the sake of educating, which is why they don't typically end up making any money. Like they're just like, yeah, I'll come to 5 meetings with you and I'll tell you all my stuff. But at some point that has to become a business relationship, right?
Right,
So that conversion
and
was always difficult.
I think we've talked about this before, like the strategic give. So great salespeople, we always end up at sales, me and you. It is my background, yeah.
It's my Achilles heel. But it's a right, you know. So if you do like strategy, you have your value proposition, then you got to sell.
You
the
got to
thing.
sell it, right?
And if you can't sell
But
the
great
thing,
salespeople,
if you can't sell the thing, nothing else matters.
Great salespeople go backwards.
Okay.
So poor
So you tell me I
salespeople
haven't been
go.
walking backwards enough?
But let me articulate that.
Because I can start
A
doing
lot
that.
of people go, Eric, nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Would you like to give me this $200,000 deal?
Yeah.
It's like trying to get married before you date.
Right.
Okay? So a smart salesperson looks at that $200,000 deal and they look back, a step back, and say to themselves, what's a smaller, easier deal to close with this client where we can prove out
And get there.
what we do, and it makes that $200,000 deal an easy yes.
Yeah.
Okay? And they look back even one step further and say to themselves, what is a give that I can do? In other words, I'm going to give first in the relationship. What can I give that is valuable to the client, that is easy for me to give, and moves us to that next deal?
And I'm going to add one thing to that, and has a finite end to it.
Well, that makes it a smart, when I say easy, okay, doesn't cost me a lot of time, doesn't cost me a lot of money, but was valuable if they don't do business with me. They still had a win.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so let's just use our business. So I might say, would it be valuable if I got your executives in a room for an hour to talk about alignment around your strategy? And then I'll go back and I will write up for you my thoughts coming out of that meeting.
And that's super smart because once you do that, you know so much more on what you need to pitch back anyway,
Yes.
right?
So they're not going to say, no, help me get alignment with my executives. They're going to be like, yeah. So that's a great give. What I'm not going to say is, would you like me to come in there and assess your whole 30-person sales organization and come back with a 100-page report on what, you see what I'm saying? So if you're smart, the give gets you to the next step.
Okay. Yep.
So you got to be thoughtful
Yeah.
about what it is. So what I would say about the example you gave me is you tend to give too much.
Yeah. No, I
And
see
you
this
give
as-
randomly, Eric. In other words, you're giving because you know it and you want to impart that knowledge. You're not giving it because it's going to get you to that next deal.
Right. No, absolutely.
Free coaching.
Thank you. Well, the seat I've never wanted. Like businesses I've started before, I've always had partners who handled sales.
Yeah.
And then I learned that actually held us back
Mm-hmm.
because I could sell it better than they could. It
Right.
just wasn't. I didn't view it that way. So it's an interesting thing. So as you think about, so if I'm strategy, right,
Yeah.
proposition, let's say we've now hired the right salespeople. We have a sales team in place, and we're starting
Mm-hmm.
to kind of see that scale. As you're working with companies that either want to, they're looking for some kind of either bringing that leadership team together, succession. What is next? Like, what are the things that? Because those are big things to solve. Like, if you solve those three,
Yes.
then where do I go there?
Where I look at it in the work that we do is really CEO coaching, aligning the leaders to garner support inside the organization. I told you I'm speaking for a couple hundred executives in a few weeks.
They want you to
and
teach trust.
They want to build trust in the organization. And I said, yeah, so that's your first mistake. People don't trust organizations.
Yeah.
They trust leaders.
and each other.
So your job as a leader is to build trust in you. What does that look like?
Yeah.
How do we answer that question? So we do a lot of work with leaders. We do a lot of work around strategy. I do a lot of work around sales and marketing, the marketing parts. Randy does a lot of the exit work and succession planning.
Yeah, you're talking about trust. You bringing that up. The book. Have you read 5 Dysfunctions of a Team?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and so one of my favorite parts of that is that the leadership team often sees who they work with, like their direct line, as their team, as their first team, and having the leadership team see the leadership team as their first team is such a dramatic mind shift within a company when you're trying to grow it and scale it, because it breaks down the divisions, right? Because it's like, oh no, this group and this group and this group. It's no. This group.
So it's interesting you say that, because one of the conversations about this is how to seat these 200 executives. And their knee jerk is to seat them by function. And I said, my bias is to mix them up and get diversity of thought in the room.
Yeah, you've been through our card sort exercise that we do. And when we do those with companies, specifically if they brought new groups together, we purposefully mix them up. And from that card sort exercise, we get a lot of understanding of alignment. Like if the card sort's really different on this group from this group, then you got a major problem. I've worked with groups where they basically sorted exactly the same.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
I think that was us when I ran that company you worked with.
Yeah.
These guys are in the middle of a big integration. And so I think it's important to mix these folks up and get them to know each other and because they're dealing with a lot of transition issues.
So let me ask you, this will be an interesting conversation or ask. So why do you like the messy, complex?
Oh, I like to fix stuff. So, we worked together when I ran a couple companies, and I had an investor ask me a really interesting question. And he said, "Are you a consultant or an operator?" I said, "Where are you going with that?" He said, "I've invested in a lot of companies, Jane. There are consultants and there are operators. They don't see the world differently. They're never the same person. Are you a consultant or an operator?" I said, "How would I figure that out?" He said, "Well, you had those companies humming. Let's say COVID wouldn't have happened. What would you have done once those things were just singing?" I said, "Honestly, if I'm really frank with you, I probably would have broken something so I could fix it." or I would have quit.
That's why I sold my business in 2012.
Yeah, and he just
they were
went,
like, yeah.
and I
Is that a
said,
consultant?
okay.
That's a
I
consultant.
love to fix
Oh, yeah.
stuff. I love to see leaders and people in organizations have ahas. Like that's what gets me jazzed, right? That somebody, you ask a question and they just go, wow, that created so much clarity for us.
Yeah.
That's what gets me up in the morning. So
Yeah,
I'll never run a company again.
Yeah. Well, the business I had in 2012, one of the reasons I left, it was running great.
Yeah, it's boring
And
to
they're
me.
like, they wanted me to show up every day and walk in and sit in the office. I'm like, this is terrible.
That's
This
yeah,
is
it's a terrible job for me.
Yeah.
So,
I need something to break.
and I love the diversity of organizations. I mean, we're working right now with giant manufacturing. We're working in supply chain. We're working in media distribution. I mean, we're all across the board.
Yeah.
And that just, I need that to function.
Which is not 98% of the world.
I guess it isn't.
No, there's that stability. The thing works this way, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I love to bring all of that to bear.
Yeah.
The work that I've done running companies, the work that I've done working for giant companies like Coke and Mercedes and Home Depot, the work that we've done for small companies, and just coalesce all of that together for the benefit of a CEO that's running a smaller to mid-market business.
Well, and in today's transformational time, even the most stable business is in this really weird place of determining who they are, where they are, what they're doing next, what it looks like, how they work.
Right.
There's so many of them in this kind of like tailspin because things aren't the way they were.
And the talent problem, which we probably didn't have time to get into, but you have to look at the talent in your organization differently than you ever did. You have to look at how you get work done differently than you did in the past, because there's a talent shortage and it's not going away. So leaders have to ask themselves two questions that they probably didn't have to ask pre-COVID. One is, how do I get work done in my company? Do I need all the same? In other words, stop looking at job titles and looking at work that needs to happen.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, how am I going to attract and retain talent? I don't think it was a pre-COVID thing, but stay interviews are a very big post-COVID thing, which is asking your employees things like, how happy are you working here? When was the last time you thought about leaving our company? Those are hard questions for leaders to ask, but more important than ever, because getting back that talent and onboarding new talent is so expensive and so causes so much transition in companies.
Yeah, and one of the things, like tribal knowledge and some of that, because that takes a while to get that back and to get somebody kind of
Yes, somebody told me that their niece worked at a very senior job at McDonald's, and their team got so used to being remote, and then when everybody came back to headquarters, they said, we'd really like to stay remote. We were really successful this way. And headquarters said, no, you have to come back. And they lost that whole team.
Oh, wow. It's crazy.
Why would you give up all that legacy knowledge in your company for something that...
Especially if there's proof that it was working the other way.
Yes.
Yeah, so crazy. Well, it's always fun to talk with you. So thank you for joining me.
And, the water was okay. Bourbon would have been better.
Oh, bourbon. Oh, okay. Yeah. We could have, yeah. Absolutely. We're a marketing firm.
I know.
We do like all kinds of. We had a Funlandia session the other day, and we purposely had bourbon because we were trying to name a company. And
people are
going to
think we need a rehab or something. It's not true.
It's very much under control.
It's not
very
true.
much under control. So, all right. So you've been listening to The Claw. I'm Eric Holtzclaw, Chief Strategist at Liger Partners. I've been joined today by Jane Gentry from Jane Gentry and Company. All of her contact information will be in our show notes. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Claw podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, rate and review this podcast. And if you or someone you know wants to make an appearance on this show, email us at yourbestie@ligerpartners.com.